nestled deep within the rolling countryside, where the whispering winds seemed to carry secrets long forgotten, lay a place known only to the bravest or most foolhardy souls, Hollow Hill. It was a place of shadows and eerie silences, where the ancient oaks stood like sentinels guarding a forgotten past. The villagers from the nearby town of Ravenswood spoke of it in hushed tones, their voices laced with fear and superstition. For centuries, tales of ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences had surrounded the hill, but none were more chilling than the story of Alara Vane, a forbidden love. Alara was the daughter of Lord Thomas Vane, the stern and unforgiving master of Ravenswood Manor. She was as beautiful as she was spirited, with hair like spun gold and eyes that gleamed with a fire that no suitor could extinguish. But her beauty was a curse as much as a blessing, for it drew the attention of those who were best left alone. Among the many who vied for her hand was Sir Cedric Blackwood, a dark and brooding knight whose wealth and power were rivaled only by the secrets he kept. Alara, however, had already given her heart to another Rowan, a humble woodsman who lived on the edge of Hollow Hill. Their love was pure and true, but it was also forbidden. Lord Vane would never allow his daughter to marry a man of such lowly birth. Despite the dangers, Alara and Rowan continued to meet in secret beneath the ancient oaks of Hollow Hill, where the air was thick with the scent of moss and the songs of unseen birds. It was here, under the cover of night, that they pledged their love to one another, swearing to defy anyone who stood in their way. The curse of Hollow Hill. But Hollow Hill was no ordinary place. The land was said to be cursed, haunted by spirits who had never found peace. Legends spoke of an ancient pagan temple that once stood there, where dark rituals were performed to appease the old gods. Some said that the hill was a doorway to another world, a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin. Alara had always dismissed these tales as mere superstition, but Rowan had grown up hearing them from his grandmother, who was a wise woman and a healer. She had warned him never to venture too deep into the woods, for fear of awakening something that should remain asleep. One night, as Alara and Rowan lay in each other's arms beneath the moonlit sky, they heard a sound, a low, mournful wail that seemed to rise from the very earth beneath them. The wind picked up, whipping through the trees with a ferocity that made the branches creak and groan. The air grew cold, and the shadows deepened, taking on shapes that seemed to move of their own accord. Rowan stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for the small silver amulet his grandmother had given him for protection. "We should leave," he whispered, his voice tense with fear. But Alara was unafraid. "It's just the wind," she said, though even she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. As they turned to leave, they heard the wail again, louder this time and closer. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble, and the shadows coalesced into a dark figure that stood at the edge of the clearing. It was tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed like embers in the night. A skeletal hand reached out toward them, and a voice that sounded like the rustling of dead leaves whispered a single word: "Leave." Alara and Rowan fled, their hearts pounding in their chests, but the figure followed, gliding silently through the trees. It was only when they reached the edge of the woods that the specter stopped, its glowing eyes fixed on Alara. "You belong to me," it hissed, before vanishing into the shadows. The tragedy unfolds. Alara returned to Ravenswood Manor that night, shaken but determined not to let fear control her. She refused to speak of what she had seen, even to Rowan, though the memory of the specter haunted her dreams. But the haunting was not confined to her dreams alone. Strange things began to happen at Ravenswood Manor. Doors would open and close on their own, candles would flicker and extinguish without warning, and a cold, oppressive presence seemed to linger in the hallways. Servants whispered of a curse, and Lord Vane grew more irritable and paranoid with each passing day. Rowan, too, was not untouched by the curse. He became withdrawn and distant, his once bright eyes now filled with a deep sorrow. He spoke of hearing Alara's voice in the woods, calling to him, begging him to return to Hollow Hill. But when he went there, he found nothing but the wind and the trees. As the days turned to weeks, Alara's health began to deteriorate. She grew pale and weak, her once vibrant spirit fading away like the dying light of a candle. The specter, it seemed, had claimed her after all. Desperate to save the woman he loved, Rowan sought out his grandmother, who had long since passed away. But even in death, she had not abandoned him. In a dream, she came to him, her voice gentle but firm. "The hill is cursed," she told him, "but curses can be broken. You must return to the place where you first pledged your love and make a sacrifice, a life for a life." The final sacrifice. Rowan knew what he had to do, though the thought of it tore him apart. He returned to Hollow Hill alone, carrying with him the silver amulet and a small dagger. The night was dark and still, the air heavy with anticipation. At the clearing where he and Alara had once been so happy, he knelt and placed the amulet on the ground. "Take me instead," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Let her live." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the ground beneath him began to tremble, and the shadows grew darker, swirling around him like a storm. The specter appeared once more, its eyes blazing with an unholy light. "You would give your life for hers?" it asked, its voice a mere whisper on the wind. Rowan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yes." The specter seemed to consider this for a moment before it reached out with a bony hand and touched Rowan's chest. A cold, searing pain shot through him, and he fell to the ground, gasping for breath. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the specter fading away, its eyes no longer filled with malice, but with something resembling sorrow. The legacy of Hollow Hill. When the villagers found Rowan's body the next morning, they were shocked, but not surprised. They buried him at the edge of the woods, far from the cursed hill, and said prayers to ward off any lingering spirits. Alara, who had been on the brink of death, awoke that same morning with no memory of the past few weeks. She mourned Rowan deeply, though she never knew the true extent of his sacrifice. In time, the strange occurrences at Ravenswood Manor ceased, and the villagers spoke of the curse being lifted. But Hollow Hill remained a place of mystery and fear. Some say that on certain nights, when the moon is full and the wind is still, you can still hear the mournful wail of the specter, searching for the one who gave his life for love. And so, the legend of Hollow Hill lives on, a tale of love, sacrifice, and the restless spirits that haunt the land. Those who dare to venture there do so at their own peril, for the hill is a place where the past and the present are intertwined, and where the line between the living and the dead is all too thin.